Tears for the Tear God, Salt for the Salt Throne, and Gas the Leaf Tribe.
The report on missing and murdered Indigenous women in Canada was released earlier this week, if I'm not mistaken. Turns out, Aboriginal women in Canada have a murder rate 4 to 5 times higher than non-Aboriginal women. And since 1980, I believe, officially, over 1,500 Aboriginal women and girls have gone missing or been murdered. And that's officially. According to some sources, due to bad record keeping or poor investigations, that number may be as high as 4,000. Now, this is a tragedy, and as a nation, sure, we should be looking into it, absolutely, doing something about it. But it turns out, this is actually part of a broader issue. And if we're going to do something about it, we should be tackling the broader issue. Yes, I am saying, won't somebody think of the men? So in Canada, police are actually fairly good at what they do. Something like 89% of all murders get solved. And that number is consistent with Aboriginal women being murdered at 88% of those murders being solved. Officially, the official numbers. We don't have statistics for the some 2,500 estimated, so I can't speak to that directly. But officially, 88% of the murders get solved. Turns out some 50% of Aboriginal women are murdered by a family member, and another 25% or so are murdered by an acquaintance, with only 8% of them being murdered by a stranger. Largely, broadly, they're family members and close acquaintances, more likely to be Aboriginal than not Aboriginal. And it turns out that 70% of Aboriginal women who are murdered by Aboriginal men. Now, when we look at these statistics, Aboriginal versus not Aboriginal, you can see how high the rate of the murder rate is for Aboriginal women versus non-Aboriginal women. 5.02 per 100,000. Just insane. Where non-Aboriginal women, 0.7 to 0.77 per 100,000. That was a very bad year, 2015. But then we look at Aboriginal men. Right? 12, 13, 13.4. What? It's insane. Where their women are being murdered at a rate 4 to 5 times higher than non-Aboriginal women, the men are being murdered at a rate 6 to 7 times higher. It's crazy. And that's 3 plus times higher than Aboriginal women. And if the trend holds, it makes sense that some 70% of these Aboriginal men are murdered by Aboriginal men. Like I was saying, this is a broader issue, and it shows right here. It is so much broader. But somehow, the feminist, is this intersectional feminism that does this, that manages to twist this into, oh no, the women, completely ignoring the men. And I'm not saying don't investigate the women. Yeah, you gotta, obviously, but this is bigger than just that. It is far bigger. And when you're gonna take your time and put all your resources into investigating this, you're missing this, which means you're missing this. This isn't one whole problem. Why do I have to explain this not only to adults, but to educated people who have an audience with the government? Fucking feminists, I literally can't even. The other day on the radio, I heard a woman describing to the radio show host how these women were murdered because they're Indigenous and because they're women. And when the radio host brought up the fact that 70% of these murdered Indigenous women were murdered by Indigenous men, I was just amazed at the mental gymnastics this woman was going to explain, to insist that while the women were murdered because they're Indigenous and because they were women, the murdering had nothing to do with them being Indigenous, but everything to do with them being men. And somehow this is still a slow motion genocide orchestrated by white people. How? How do they buy their own bullshit? Are they buying it? Or do they just believe that everyone else is so stupid that they're going to buy it? Is that... See, people come from the humanities and they don't understand how to study and interpret statistics correctly. So you end up with stuff like this. I think that's simpler. They're simply uneducated and sticking their noses into something they have no business sticking their noses. It's that simple. They saw the Aboriginal women versus non-Aboriginal women murder rates and stopped researching. Yeah, never attribute to malice what you can chalk up to stupidity. Relevant links to shit I said in the description? Maybe. I'm Irving Twin. Like, subscribe, or don't. It's a free country. At least it used to be.